for everybody who is new to American Inno, we're a digital media events and data property focused on local innovation. We cover growth. Most of the time, that's tech-enabled businesses locally. We started in Boston 10 years ago. We're in 14 markets today, and the farthest west we are is Denver. So we're in Boston, D.C., Chicago, Minneapolis, Cincinnati, Rhode Island, Atlanta, Wisconsin, Colorado, Charlotte, Dallas, Richmond, and I think I missed one or two. Austin, Texas. So that I went in order of launch. What you heard there is a combination of the Bostons, the Austins, the Denver, Chicago, kind of emerging, becoming tech ecosystems. And then Cincinnati, Richmond, Rhode Island, places where we've seen a lot of excitement, a lot of engagement, a lot of traction, where we have seen by being that source for local innovation, producing a lot of media and events for a community like Providence, like Richmond, we can add a tremendous amount of value in. About 6 years ago, we were brought into the American City Business Journal's family, making us a sister site to the prestigious Silicon Valley Business Journal. And it's been great working with Josh, Mary, and the team on putting together this event, which is exciting for us. This is the first event we've done in a market we don't have an Inno in. And part of that is because when we were looking at our audience at the beginning of this year, we saw that even though we're a local business, we are in the community business. Richmond Inno is focused on Richmond innovators. Minneapolis Inno is focused on mini innovators. But about 10 to 15% of every single Inno market has Bay Area readers. And part of that is because this is one of the few areas in the world that's going to be interested in all of the new exciting things that are happening in Atlanta, Boston, DC, Chicago, all of the markets we're in. So it's been exciting doing this event for our readers that aren't in our local markets. And part of that is due to our amazing host and sponsor, Analog Devices. We've worked with them a number of times in Boston, and it's exciting doing this event here in the Bay Area. It's also been great working with Analog Devices and Josh on putting this panel and event together. Because we're covering growth, a lot of that is on the startup side, but we want to make sure that Inno is short for innovation. We don't want to perpetuate the narrative that startups have an exclusiveness on innovation, which is why we love working with Analog Devices that have been in this business for a long time and learning how these Fortune 500s and large corporations are innovating through their corporate centers. So this is a conversation that is impactful to all of our markets, which is why tomorrow on every Inno, we're going to have a recap story on the highlights, the insights that came from tonight. So if you're curious about reading about tonight, you have the pick of the litter. If you want to read it on DC Inno, it'll be there. You want to read about it on Rhode Island Inno? That would be great. You know, we need a few more eyeballs there. So wherever you want to read about this story, it will be on every Inno site. Before we kick it to the panel, I wanted to bring up Bernal Arroyo with Analog Devices to tell you a little more about the space.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight at this special event where you're going to learn about corporate innovation labs, how they work, and how to connect with them. My name is Bernal Arroyo, and I'm with the Analog Garage here in Boston, in Santa Clara. The Analog Garage is a corporate incubator for analog devices, and I would imagine that most of you don't know what the Analog Garage does, and so I'm going to take a couple of minutes and tell you a little bit about it. So Analog Devices is a $6 billion semiconductor company headquartered in Massachusetts. The Analog Garage is where we foster innovation, where we foster entrepreneurship. And so we do this in a number of ways. We do it internally and externally. Internally, we have about 15,000 employees all over the world. We consider all of these employees entrepreneurs. These employees can pitch ideas through the Analog Garage. If we decide to fund them, then they can take time away from their work schedule and actually work on these ideas until they can prove them out. The Analog Garage will provide them with a good starting process so that they can be as successful as they can be. We also collaborate with startups and research universities all over the world. with startups, sometimes we will provide our technology so they can accelerate their progress as much as they can. Sometimes we'll invest in these startups, and sometimes we'll acquire them. And finally, the third thing we do here at the Analog Garage is to build a critical mass of non-traditional expertise. We not only have semiconductor engineers in our garage, but we have a lot of people that have signal processing backgrounds, machine learning backgrounds, quantum computing backgrounds, software backgrounds. So what we're trying to do here is to create a critical mass of talent so that Analog Devices can continue to be a leading company in the future and also maintain growth over the next 10 years and beyond.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to be here with our panel. And I'm going to be introducing them, shortly. So first off, a little bit about me. I'm the editor-in-chief and general manager of the Silicon Valley Business Journal. I've been in Silicon Valley now for about 2.5 years, coming from New York, which is where I really focused in on entrepreneurs and startups and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And one thing that I always thought that was interesting about that time was right after the Great Recession, and there was so much pessimism and negativity that was going on, except in one area, which were startup events. If you would go into any kind of a startup meetup at that point in time, you didn't really realize that all hell was breaking loose in other parts. People in this community were excited about starting something, building something, and growing something. And even if they failed after that, they picked themselves up and they went again. And so, for me, this is, I think, one of my favorite topics to get into is about innovation and business creation and what you do with that. So I'm thrilled to be here with our friends from Inno and with all of you. I want to get right kind of to the heart of the program, which is all about innovation hubs, which is kind of a little bit of a new idea that has kind of grown in the last few years. I mean, it used to be all about accelerators and incubators is kind of what got most of the attention. Well, now it seems that innovation hubs have kind of taken over that role. And I think what you'll hear tonight from our panelists are that there is no one model for an innovation hub. Before we could kind of, when you would say incubator or accelerator, you kind of got an idea about what that program meant, even if you really didn't know anything about them. Innovation hubs, you get a certain idea in your head, which is all true, but there's so much more to them, and we're really going to be exploring those differences and how these programs develop and how you can access them as well. So I'd like to introduce our panel before we get started. We have Natalie Cummings. Natalie is the Director of Product Development Operations for IBM Data and AI at IBM. We have, to her right is Nimrode Moreshet, the Director of Emerging Business at Analog Devices. And then we've got Michael Magyar, the lead material developer and tech scout at the Gore Innovation Center. And then finally, we have Justin Muller, the global head of prototyping at CISCO Chill. Welcome. Let's give them all a big round of applause, please, before we get started. So I'm going to start really basically with and ask each of you to kind of explain your role in your various programs and just a touch about how you got here. Natalie, let's start with you.
All right. My name is Natalie Cummings. I'm basically the COO of our IBM Data and AI development team. That means I'm a bit of an internal venture capitalist, funding our own teams from a development perspective, deciding which projects are going to get funded. One of those projects that we support internally is the innovation centers inside our lab down in Silicon Valley Lab, South San Jose. We partner with companies big and small, very small. We invite startups to large enterprises into a machine learning hub that we have down in Silicon Valley Lab, where customers can take an idea that they've been bantering around. Maybe they're not sure how to get started on a machine learning or AI project, and we will take them from ideation, teaching them about our technologies that can help solve it, infusing them with technologists. We have data science team who will partner with them to make sure that they can get a model that they can put into production. We also have other opportunities with the data science elite team where those people will go on site and co-create with startups and enterprises in their environment.
Great, great. Nimrode, tell us about where we are now. I know we've already gotten one take on it, but if there was anything that was missed, share or tell us about your role specifically in the program.
No, Bernal did an excellent job. I manage the West Coast Analog Garage team here. It's analog devices, internal incubation / corporate venture arm. And we're looking at Horizon 3 technologies, emerging technologies that complement what ADI does. Areas like lab on a chip, millimeter wave, communications, but beyond communications, imaging radar, advanced materials.
Mike, what about your role with Gore and a little bit about Gore?
Sure, yeah, so nice to meet everyone here. I'm the Tech Scout and materials developer with our innovation team. Tech Scout is kind of like a technology matchmaker, where there's emerging businesses or startups that could leverage our existing materials or insourcing technology that could be complementary to our own that we might want to partner with, acquire, license, et cetera. Gore, for those of you who aren't aware, is a 60-year-old materials innovation company. We actually started as a wire and cable company originally. Our most famous product is probably Gore-Tex, for those of you who hike and ski and whatnot are probably familiar with. It was the first waterproof breathable apparel. And then we're also in medical devices, industrial products, ranging from filters to guitar strings to dental floss. And the thing those all have in common is they're solving challenging materials trade-offs. And what motivated me to come out here and Gore as a company to have a presence here is we recognized as sort of the low-hanging fruit of materials challenges has been plucked over the last, century. Partnership, and especially early stage partnership, has become more and more critical for us.
Great.
Yeah.
Justin, what about you and Chill?
All right, so CHILL is part of CISCO. CHILL stands for Cisco Hyper Innovation Living Labs. And it's an innovation function within Cisco that brings together multiple big corporates to build ecosystem-wide solutions. And we start that process with a living lab where we actually bring in executives from 3 to 4 companies in a vertical. And we form them on teams together, and they do the innovation. So it turns kind of your traditional startup or hackathon model on its head, where you think of like engineers coming hand in hand to someone with money saying, I have this great idea, won't you fund me? Now we're saying, no, we'll take the judges and we'll put them on the teams. And if they come up with something they like, they can fund themselves. And the key kind of like element that has made CHILL really successful and kind of defines and makes CHILL separate than a lot of the other innovation groups at Cisco is that when in that process, when the executives are kind of ideating over 2 days, we have a build team, which is what I lead and how I come into this. So I'm the head prototyper, and we have a build team of about 20 engineers that listens in and builds whatever the execs are thinking about. Every 90 minutes, we have a real prototype. And the reason for that is we have another team, which is about 50 end users. So these are the customers and end users of the companies that are involved in the event. And what that allows us to do is you have an executive that can fund the thing, come up with an idea, see it come to life within 90 minutes, and then get validation from the end users in that same cycle. And that immediately allows all of the companies to align behind whether or not this idea is going to be successful.
I think I'm a little exhausted listening to that, but it's really kind of fascinating. I kind of want to start off, this is maybe a little cheeky, but the fascination with garages. Right, I mean, Silicon Valley was kind of built on. I built my Apple computer in a garage, and the Hewlett-Packard guys in a garage. So I know that. Let's see, we're in the analog garage. IBM has a garage.
We just call it a lab.
A lab, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for the garage types. What's the magic in the word garage to you?
Well, like you said, I think a lot of the breakthrough innovations come from small companies not necessarily always big ones, although I hope no one management from ADI is listening. So it would be malpractice if you didn't keep an eye on what's going on in small companies, both because you don't want to miss the next big thing and also you don't want to get disrupted. And that's why these big corporations are kind of obsessed with startups and garages.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think, the name is catchy, sexy, if you will. Our IBM garage up in San Francisco is a place where we, again, bring customers in to co-create there. But the little bit more homegrown kind of entry-level offerings that we have, the Machine Learning Hub, the Data Science Experience team, it's all the same skills and people who have a problem that needs to be solved. And I think more than anything of this, the name garage, right, it's really about the skills, the people who are you working with, and people with a passion to solve a problem.
Got it. So I want to do a little, raise your hand kind of a moment, because as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of their programs are very different, although they're all going after the same thing, which is innovation and kind of discovery. And so that everybody can have a better sense about the types of things that you're doing, raise your hand if your program qualifies for this. So first off, who thinks of themselves, and now you've got to think of yourself as your organization, who thinks of themselves as an incubator or accelerator? Yeah? Oh, but halfway? Okay. Who provides mentorship to people coming through your programs? Okay. Who provides office space?
We can if you're interested.
Who provides just general expertise? All right. Who invests in companies and takes equity in those companies?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. And lastly, who is looking for strategic partners when you're going through your programs? All right. So a couple of points where we're all in agreement here, especially when it comes to strategic partnerships and expertise in what you're providing. Natalie, I want to dig in with you a little bit first because you've got the garage, but you're also really into machine learning and how, and that's sort of one of the more accessible parts of your program. What exactly does that mean? I mean, what kind of person or company would be the best to take advantage of that?
Somebody who has an issue with analyzing, they may have a problem that a large set of data can help provide a prediction. One of the startups that we work with who delivers stuff to us, I'm not going to say what they deliver to us, but they deliver it on a daily basis. They buy the supply on a daily basis. They don't know how much we're going to buy. It's between our employees and this customer. They don't know how much we're going to buy on a daily basis, and the price fluctuates every day, and there's competitors all around. If you buy me a drink, I'll tell you what it is. But we brought that startup in, just a sort of a fun, interesting thing for us, actually, to come in and bring their data. So there's a lot of information they have about past sales, prices of their competitors, the days of the week. And we brought those folks into our machine learning hub to say, if we put all that data together, if we apply our technology on top, can we help them predict what they should buy every day and what they should charge it for the next day based on their competitors. So problems where there's a lot of data that needs to be synthesized are the kind of things that folks can come in and help us with. And maybe you have a lot of business users and a software developer who understand the problem that buying that stuff is, but they don't know how to combine all that data and do the prediction. They don't know what technology to apply. That's where our team can come in and help.
And in that instance, how long does it take to go through that program to really get the benefits of what you're doing?
It can be very quick, in a few weeks even, not full time. But one of the challenges can be, depending on the maturity of the company, whether we can get or access the data. That can be where some of the delay is in being able to get the data that we need to do the models. But if the data is available, it can be days to weeks.
Justin, you talked about this really kind of intense 2-day period that people are involved in that program. But what leads up to that? How much preparation do the people who are going through, what do they need to do to be ready to deal with chill?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of preparation that goes into those 2 days. So the whole process before then is probably 18 months worth of work. And I think it actually relates back to your earlier question about the garage, the dream of Silicon Valley, living in the garage. And part of how we structure that setup period, that 18 months, is thinking about how not only is that this beautiful dream that you can hack something together in your garage, but it's also like a boulevard of broken dreams where there are so many fantastic technologies and ideas that fall by the wayside and fail spectacularly sometimes. And it's not a problem with the technology. Often it's not what you did in the garage that was wrong, but it's because you lacked your executive sponsors, you lacked your funding, you lacked customers, you lacked end-user adaptivity. And so what we do is we say, okay, there's fantastic technologies, but what about all those other things that are required to make innovation successful? That's what we spend those 18 months finding out. We say, who are the customers that are going to care about this? Put them in the room. Who are the businesses that are going to need to invest in this? Put them in the room. Who is the engineers and the machine learning guys that are going to need to say, yeah, we can do that with machine learning? Put them in the room. So it's 18 months of lining up all these people so that we're all in the room together for 2 days.
And the people who are there initially, are they in the Cisco universe? Are they outsiders? Who really is coming in, and who's that primary person? I mean,
during the 2 days?
Yeah, I mean, who has the idea? Is it a Cisco person, or is it an outsider, or is it a mix between the two?
Well, none of our projects are Cisco exclusive.
I see.
Right. So all of our ideas start with one of our main functions is we listen to all the Cisco execs. We figure out what's kind of coming on the roadmap for Cisco, and then we listen to hundreds of customers and figure out and see if there's an overlap. And that's where we start. So for our last lab, we talked with Rockwell. Probably 2 years ago, and started talking about some of the Industry 4.0 concerns they had and how that intersected with some of the networking in factories that Cisco was looking at. And that was enough of a nexus to start thinking about what solutions in that ecosystem looks like.
Got it. Nimrode, with Analog, 60-year-old company, all over the U.S., especially in Boston. I mean, as I understand it, you've got sort of a similar question. You've got internal people and external people kind of coming through. Does one have more weight than the other in terms of the people who are using the garage, or is it just best idea wins?
So the internal incubation side is what we have is we allow any employee, like Bernal said, from the company can pitch an idea, and then we have a committee that votes on it, and we kind of treat it like a mock VC, seed stage, Series A, B, and so forth. And that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, the external side, is we're looking for startups that have technologies that complement what we're doing, or maybe they can take our existing products into new markets. Sometimes we're developing new sensors for these companies where they have an interesting algorithm. Sometimes they're using our chips in their system to do things that we didn't even know were possible. So we're looking for those types of things that will let us, we're not in it for a return on equity when we invest. We're trying to sell product, develop new products, enter new markets.
But is there any bleed between those two groups in your program? In other words, are the external people, do they commingle with the Analog employees who are also kind of pitching and developing, or do you keep those two sides pretty separate?
No, so the external companies can leverage our design expertise, our testing, qualification, sales force, product line engineering. And actually the internal things, what we call Analog Garage initiatives, sometimes they include an external party, whether it's a university or a startup, in the idea itself. So I guess they get mixed up.
Mike, your program is brand new. I think you told me before you've had one company that has gone through so far or that is going through right now?
Yeah, I didn't really introduce exactly what we
Yeah,
do.
yeah, please do.
There's a lot of parallels to what Nimrode's doing with the team here at Analog Garage, but some explicit differences as well. So our team's been in place about 2 years, and our mission is really to create new business opportunities through external collaboration. And to parallel what Nimrode said, sometimes that's new markets that we can address with our technology that's existing or emerging from Gore, or sometimes that's looking for external technologies that could be complementary to our own. And we do that sort of in 3 different ways. We'll engage the ecosystem here, meaning startups, other corporates, investors, academia, around a topic that we see sort of a nexus occurring in. For example, we have an event focused on biosensing next week where we're bringing that kind of community. And that's sort of the inspiration for sparking ideas for collaboration. Where could we see some potential synergy, like I mentioned? And we've been doing that for 2 years now on a variety of topics. We got started in the digital healthcare space because we saw a lot of potential coming from a fabrics, electronics, medical device background that we have. But none of those existing lines of business actually touch in their primary strategy on digital health. So hosting those sort of stepchild, projects that need some incubation and business validation is one of our goals. The other thing that we drive out of our center, which doesn't often occur at the center, is strategic partnerships. So things that would involve a joint development agreement, for example, and perhaps some investment. And those will be in advance of exploring a space, for example, digital health, or a technology, something that could be a new core technology that Gore might want to acquire. And then lastly, the sort of physical embodiment that we have at the lab is the newest one that we've just had one startup, which is differentiated from some of the other labs around the area. The cost of entry is that there's some win-win in hosting folks for about a 3-month period. We give them access to capital, equipment, expertise, facilities, space that are hard to come by as a startup for no exchange in equity and no cost to the startup. And so really what we're trying to do there is perhaps it's a startup who has an idea to use our material in a new market, and we want to give that some runway to see if it could work. Or a startup that has a technology we're interested in. In the past, as a corporate, we would say, come back to us when you've got a working prototype and can prove to us that we should take it. And we realized that we were missing out on quite a bit of earlier stage technologies where if we were engaged in the conversation earlier and could articulate what we would care about, which startups are hearing from the investment community in terms of a target market, but not really from a strategic partner like Gore. And those are the folks who we're bringing into our lab space to sort of incubate them when they're not quite ready for a joint development program yet.
I see.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is interesting about the Gore space is you talk about it in a community kind of a way. You talk about it in how it is, you've got a center, you invite people in, you do events there. I'm curious about your other programs. How accessible are they, do you, to kind of the outside world, not just in terms of participants to these particular programs? Do you see them as brand extensions of your individual companies and kind of a way of showing the world around, we do innovation?
Yeah, I think for IBM, the thing that we're interested in for ourselves, for the world, for our partners is proving what the technology can do. We have so many, data and AI offerings that can be applied to so many different problems, and so we're interested in learning for ourselves how far we can take the technology. So we are looking, to go out and share the story with the world for the folks that we bring into the Machine Learning Hub or the data science experience, especially.
Justin, what about for CISCO from either community building or boosting CISCO's own image to the outside world?
Yeah.
How does this play in? Is it an effective tool?
Well, CISCO actually does quite a bit of outreach and interacting with community and innovation ways in many of our other programs. Chill is actually not one of them.
I see.
Right? Chill has a very strict no tourists rule. So everybody that comes to a Chill event is a participant, and usually a paying participant. And the reason for that is we're very, very focused on actionable outcomes, right? And so we don't feel a responsibility like we have to prove to anybody that we're doing innovation, and it's not because that's not important to CISCO. It's because that's just not the role of the Chill Lab. But what we found is that by keeping it laser focused on the only reason you're here is to make something real happen, it changes the mindset of the people coming, like, okay, we've got to figure out how what we're doing here now is going to impact Monday morning and what we do in the next few weeks and months.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, because it does. I'm investing my resources into this program. I want to get something out of it a little bit more. Close the door and do that. Nimrode, what about for analog and the value of the garage when it comes into, obviously you're hosting a community event like this, so that's very outward facing. Are there other ways that you use the Innovation Lab to sort of have a wider reach?
Yeah, I think it's a good recruitment tool. Basically, if you're an engineer and you want to choose what project you want to work on, and you want to change projects frequently, garage is an ideal place to do that. Other places, you might end up working on a charger for one specific phone model for a very long time. This is not it. And also, it's a sales tool. So we bring CTOs and executives from our customers through our garage offices and show them prototypes of things that are being developed. And this really leads to tighter strategic partnerships with our customers. They get to have early input to say, yes, we're interested in this and that, or not this. So I think it has value well beyond what the strictly innovation function.
For all of your programs, I think one of the things that I find kind of the most heartening about it, we talked a little bit at the beginning of this program about the differences of, say, 10 years ago after the recession, and everybody was sort of trying to find their way. And you had some very gutsy startups kind of coming in, and it seemed that for a while the corporates were, I don't want to hear about you guys. I don't want to pay any attention. And now, for all the four of you and so many other innovation labs, where corporations are really starting to open up, or have been opening up, and realizing the tool that startups provide. Can you each provide sort of a real example of how you either maybe acquired a startup that came through your doors that you worked with, or you found talent, or you made a strategic partnership? I mean, something that is kind of very specific to that are the entrepreneurs who are here, may say, oh, I can do that too.
Our fabrics division has been around a long time. We're the pioneers of waterproof, breathable. Kind of from an innovator's dilemma standpoint, it's really hard to be out inventing ourselves, especially when we're using the same tools time and again. But within the company, one of the great things that startups bring to the table, I think, is folks who are dedicated passionately to a vision that they see and are driving it, myopically. And one of the things that we've been able to do is see and be inspired by some of these startups that don't quite have the product to market yet and haven't gotten up sort of the product pipeline or commercialization ladder. And what we were able to do at our innovation center, and I might call it an innovation interface, if that makes any sense, as opposed to a program, especially in this example. Our corporate division, Fabrics, wasn't interested in this technology yet. It was too early. They could see where they were going and said, yes, I'd buy that if it was ready, but we don't have the resources to devote to getting this off the ground. And so in this example, what we were able to do is work kind of as a concierge, if you will, between both parties, brokering, what would really be exciting to the folks leading technical and business development in our existing line of business, and what's the motivation of this startup, what would help them succeed, and really, in the end, we're signing a development agreement together that simply wouldn't have happened without sort of somebody in the middle there. And kind of on the other side, we have a core technology division full of researchers and scientists who are always innovating in the materials space, but they recognize they have some gaps in knowledge where they want to go out and find out who are the subject matter experts that are advancing this field and how can we tap into that. And so in that case, rather than us pushing into the organization, there was really a pull to say, how can we engage with this community here and learn from the knowledge experts, find out what they're lacking and find some synergy together. And in that case, we pulled together an ecosystem, in this case on the bio-based polymer side, around synthetic biology and non-petroleum-based materials that we don't have a heritage in, and could find people who are looking for folks that have what we have, which is commercial scalability, access to markets, things of that nature, and find that match.
Great.
So I'm not naming any specific startups there, but those
You
are
did
very
very well
tangible,
at that.
real examples. Yeah.
Justin, what about for you? Any specific examples that you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually work quite a bit with startups. And a lot of that is about understanding what new technologies are being built. But again, the core kind of function of CHIL is stakeholder alignment. And so one of the kind of sneaky things that we do is that we let people reinvent things that startups have already done. And what I mean by that is there was a particular startup who was doing an AI application in the supply chain space. And if I had taken that startup and gone to John Kern, who's Cisco's SVP of supply chain, and said, check out this cool startup, isn't it great? Cisco should invest, Cisco should buy them. You know, he would have said, so what? He doesn't have time to go evaluate startups. What we did instead is we put John on a team with some of his peers who were also heads of their respective supply chains in large companies. And they collectively came up with this great idea. And the idea was, it just happens, the exact same idea that that little startup has been working on for the last 2 years. And so the magic happened when we said, you know, they came up with the idea, we put a quick prototype together in the lab and put it in front of their end users, which were their supply chain operators, some of the partners that operate the supply chain, and they said, oh yes, this is fantastic, we'd love this. So you have all these heads of the supply chains now saying, I came up with this brilliant idea, it's my idea, I want to do this, let's partner and do this together. And we said, great, here's a startup, and it's going to even more accelerate what you want because you know, they've been working on it the last 2 years, they have working code, they can just slot it in and do your idea. And now you have the stakeholders aligned behind the startup to create a partnership instantaneously. So, you know, within a few weeks of that CHIL lab, we had all the legal agreements signed and the money changing hands and all those pieces to integrate a startup technology into multiple large corporations.
The cynical side of me would say that you know, don't you run into potential patent issues if if that first group says, well, we just came up with this idea, why do I now need to bring in this other group? How do you protect both sides in that equation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So before I was at Cisco, I was a patent lawyer actually for 3 years. So this
was not a staged question. I did not know that.
This was an issue near and dear to my heart. How do you get even 2 corporations to agree to share IP, much less 3 or 4, and then with a startup too? The answer is, well, very carefully. But we actually spend a lot of time thinking about what the legal agreements look like, and more often than not, in the solutions we're looking at, the tendency and the hesitancy to share IP can be overcome by a business executive that's convinced that overcoming it will be beneficial to their business. Right? And so when the SVP of our supply chain is saying, we need this now to save millions of dollars a year, it's much easier to bring the lawyers along compared to, hey, I have a cool thing we should invest in. Let's all share our IP. Right? And so what we do is we lead with the business value. And we also have very carefully worded IP agreements, understanding that at the CHIL lab, we're really looking for opportunities to work together. We're not really generating IP in those moments.
Yeah. Natalie?
To kind of turn it a little bit more to the heart, one of the things that I wanted to expand on around, IBM learning in these experiences where we can take the technology is around a startup that we were working with at our Toronto Innovation Center, actually called Ulula, so you can actually look that one up, where they were looking at supply chains and helping corporations, so sort of the corporation who's buying the materials, say from a place in India or a place in Africa, and trying to figure out. So this company wanted to identify issues with fairness to employees, safe working conditions, and so they partnered with us and used our technology to analyze Twitter sentiment, allow employees to submit anonymous complaints, if you will, or concerns to Ulula that they could then identify if there was an exploitation issue down in the supply chain somewhere that would have, if you were a corporation that was buying materials from them, you might be worried about your brand reputation if anything happened to the people who were in that supply chain. That's something, again, that we were able to do in the Innovation Center this time in Toronto, and that startup there.
Wow, really interesting.
So another nice thing about the reach that we have across IBM is the machine learning hubs that's here can learn from them and apply ideas across industry, across geography that we're learning all over the world.
Great, great. Nimrode, what about for you? Is there a real world startup story?
Yeah, I get two examples. First one is we invested in a condition-based monitoring company for machines, but this was a pure software company. And the team in the garage actually developed custom hardware to work with their algorithm for this purpose. In that instance, we actually ended up acquiring the company about a year after the investment. And another interesting aspect to it is that we kept this startup inside the garage for a year after we acquired them, kind of to ease the transition from startup to corporate world. And then after a year, they moved to the business unit. So that's one example. The other example is we just partnered and invested in a startup that makes comm systems for airborne platforms, satellites and such. And they based their whole system around some of our components. So they helped us by getting us into new markets, new areas that we weren't as big in before, but also we helped them on the credibility side get new investors, but also sell to customers that are very conservative, Lockheed, the big prime defense contractors and such. So
Good.
it was mutually beneficial. Yeah.
Those are two good examples. So I want to open it up to you all for your questions that you might have for our panel. I mean, we've heard a lot about their programs, how they're working with startups, the differences within them. Anybody have a question for the group or for a specific panelist?
Well, each one of you have learned so much with your own innovator dilemma and so on, different experiences, different mindsets, and diversity is really important for innovation, right? And you can actually share that learnings, lessons learned, and what actually worked, and you can actually have even a bigger impact when all four of you collaborate and come up with a bigger kind of a platform for innovators. So that's my question.
It sounds like you're talking about like a super innovation lab, right?
Good idea. You should patent that. It is a good idea. I don't think that the four of us have done that before. I think IBM's kind of greatest or biggest push around collaborating among companies is in the open source space. So a little bit different kind of innovation, but we're more. I think that's the takeaway message that I want you all to have about IBM. Whether you're a startup, whether you're a corporation who wants to learn more of our technology, we want to work with you. And we're also heavily investing in collaborating with other companies in the open source space. But that's a good point. Collaborating amongst the innovation centers.
One easy way is through deal referrals. You might see a company that is not relevant for you, but maybe you think that's been happening a lot, not just with accelerators, but VCs, incubators, all that.
I'd say with the one area we've been collaborating a lot with other innovation hubs is just on practices, what's working, what's not, and how. And in terms of tangible collaboration, I would say actually with the more traditional incubators and accelerators, those are the inputs to some of the strategic partnerships that we make. And so we're members at some of them and have relationships with others.
Hi, I had a question about how constrained you feel with business unit alignment within your particular organizations to what kind of innovation you actually invite into your labs.
Yeah, I'll take that one because that is very, very near and dear to Chill's heart. And we fundamentally believe that if you're not starting with the business unit alignment, that you're wasting your time, right? And the reason we do that is empirically, almost all of the technologies and startup ideas at Cisco that started and didn't really understand how they were going to hook into our core business have failed. And so one of the things we did very strategically when we started Chill is said, okay, when we're bringing companies to the table, if someone from a Cisco BU doesn't have a seat at the table, we don't do that project. So we don't look at it as a constraint. We look at it as a starting point.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a different, so the garage and analog devices was set up so it's independent from the BUs. So we'd love to usually agree with them on which startups to work with, but we have the ability also to do something they don't agree with. Maybe they're missing something. You don't want to be disrupted, and to have an independent organization is of value, I think. So you want to collaborate when you can, but if you feel strongly about a startup or a technology, I think independence is definitely a value to have another set of eyes on a company or idea.
And I think in our lab, we're probably somewhere in between the two. As over the past 2 years, that's actually probably been the area we've evolved the most in how we're striking business unit alignment. And maybe similar to Chill, we won't get started on something if there's not a sponsor, a leader in a business unit who will support it. But at the same time, at Gore, we've got a core technology organization that's focused on advancing the science of materials that has the ability to sponsor things. And we've got what we call an innovation center of expertise, but essentially a fourth business unit that's focused on creating new business units. So if it's not supported by either of those, we've tried those things and they empirically haven't gotten anywhere and have taken a lot of work. But we've got pretty broad coverage of sort of types of sponsors that have authority and the wherewithal to pull things through. And so most of our function is, you talked about 18 months prep. For some of these deals we do, once we get started on a collaborative relationship, the work can progress really quickly because we're each bringing our own expertise to the table. But we spend quite a bit of time making sure we're aligned and have support. That's sort of the magic up front that makes the work go fast. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing is that alignment.
And in IBM, I'm fortunate to be in the business unit. And the business unit is actually sponsoring these things. Found out as I was prepping for this that my boss wants to set up 3 more machine learning hubs in different cities. So it's like, all right, well, let's just get the checkbook out for that. So very lucky to have that kind of support from the executive team in the business unit to drive this kind of innovation.
Great.
In my own experience, I ran an innovation inside of Cadence from 2005 to 2012, and we leveraged 2 product lines that the company already had, and it worked great. And there was 2 other peer innovations going on at the same time, and one of them was competing with the business unit, and that business unit kind of tracked their progress and then implemented the same bits. And so Yeah, I mean, it helped the company, but that particular innovation ended up having something that the company kind of already had. And the third one, was blue sky and was not really associated with the business. And yeah, I mean, they went out and did their own startup later, but yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge strength by running the one inside, leveraging the two business units that already existed. They were my biggest fans, and they were introducing me to prospects and, feeding information like, well, actually, you need to do this other bit, right? So that can be where you just leverage all of the strengths that you have already. But if you don't go outside the box, then you stay with the company framework that you had already, right? So you want to be open to new things. You do want to invent the thing that kills your own division rather than your competitor killing your division, right? So it's a tough balance.
Thank you for that. Question?
Yeah, actually, I'm from the semiconductor industry myself, and I'd worked at a large semiconductor company for many years. And one of the issues always is, a $5-10 billion corporation. You look at a startup, and the famous phrase was, well, it doesn't move the needle. So how do you determine ultimately what's the financial return as opposed to the technology innovation return? Where's the CFO in these discussions, right? That's always, at the end of the day, the emerging business unit at this group was disbanded because the CFO just didn't see the return. And why pour all that money into these startups that never moves the needle?
That's a great question, because at the end of the day, that's the person that you really need to convince, partly about also in the business unit question. So what do you tell the CFO?
The ROI equation?
Yeah, our CFO, Carlos, love him. He understands that our business model is to invest a certain percentage of our budget into the emerging technologies, the things that might fail, the things that we might not be able to pencil out. So our unit leaders have that agreement and understanding that that's what we're going to do. And
so there's a reserve for failures.
yes, actually, yes, we almost made an award for it, but we thought it would sound bad. So, but yeah, we have a reserve for failures.
And a reserve for
Yeah.
business failures.
So an understanding that we're going to put this much on the tech, it's IBM, right? So we've been around over 100 years. This much on the things that may be declining, but we still have customers that we have to support. This much for the things that are making us revenue, now and for the next couple years, the 2 to 5 year thing, and then the big bets. So getting that relationship is critical.
And ROI, the ROI question for the rest of you?
Yeah, I think support has to come from the top, and they, like you said, have to be willing to put, albeit a small portion of R&D into these riskier ventures, and be willing to, that 1 out of 10 will work and the other 9 will fail, but hopefully the one that worked will be a home run and make up for the others. There's also a price to be paid if you don't do these things. There's a big graveyard of very large, mighty corporations that got disrupted and are now non-existent.
I'll answer for ours, again, with kind of the two lenses, looking for validating new business models where we think we can bring some of our core technology to solve a new problem. That happens within our business units, but what we take on is the things that don't fit within our business units. Gore has adopted lean startup type approaches to validate business models, and so we're de-risking those opportunities, and the proof point is in those reviews if we've proven out a business case or not. And so it's really not an ROI on dollars, but in going through numbers of assessments in that case. On the input side, and maybe we're a little different because we're a materials company, we're thinking about materials attributes, although I think I could translate that to functionality or in another area. Many of our businesses are supported by breaking paradigms in just a couple trade-off spaces, like Gore-Tex is waterproof, breathable. Those are just 2 attributes. And what we've learned over the years is if we hit on certain categories of attributes, they tend to disproportionately affect broadly our businesses. And so while a startup might be targeting a certain market with a certain market size that they're trying to address, we're looking at it through the lens of, if this technology is real, how many markets can that address? Might be much more broad than the startup. And we look at it as options for growth, and we look at the financials in that sense. What's the potential sort of options impact if we had this attribute in our toolbox? But we're pretty young. So right now our metrics are really activity-based and what we think will be predictive of delivering on those things. But as we kind of spoke before, Josh, this is all an experiment for us as a corporation. I mentioned we've got these sort of two lenses and also multiple ways of engaging. I expect what we'll be doing a year from now will look a little bit different, or maybe a lot different than what we're doing today.
Great. Justin?
Yeah, I think ROI takes a couple of forms for us. Obviously, financial is huge. At some point, an innovation that's not making money, that's telling you it's the wrong thing to do. At some point in its life. And so for us, part of our job is understanding and setting expectations for when does that point exist? When do we kill our darlings and say, well, that wasn't a good idea? But a big part of it is going back to stakeholder alignment. So you said, where's our CFO? A lot of times she's in the room. She comes to the end of the Chill event, and part of why that's important is that CISCO's execs can see where money's going, but the real reason why it's important is because they can see what our customers' execs are saying, right? And that in itself has value when some of CISCO's biggest partners says, I want to co-invest with you and get this done, right? And so even though it's not it is a financial investment, it's not a financial investment that'll move the needle. We typically start with very small 50 to 250K investments from our corporations that are involved. So it's not going to move the needle on a company the size of CISCO at the start, but the executive sponsorship and buy-in at the highest level at multiple companies that are our cherished partners and customers powers through a lot of those early years where we're trying to prove out an idea so we can get to the point where we can hopefully scale and actually impact CISCO at large.
Got it. We have time for one more question. If anybody has one, I'm going to go, right there. Yeah.
My question is, how do you go about prioritizing it? Because oftentimes in the speculative or the new space, there's a lot of open hypotheses, and they're not ultimately all of equal value to the firm. So maybe each of you could maybe just share a thought on how do you prioritize the unknowns in your speculative areas?
Who wants to take that? It was like maybe the most esoteric question of the night, and appropriate that it's the last one. Very good.
I can start off at least. One of the things, and I haven't talked about it much tonight, but one of the really key important things for Chill for prioritizing is that we listen to the end users, right? At a Chill lab, there's a group of like 30 to 50 end users, and they come in and tell us, man, if this idea was here, it'd be great or not. So that's kind of the first step, is actually listening to our end users, and that's really driven by design thinking and that startup mentality that forces us to be honest and say, just because someone who's important or makes a lot of money thinks it's a good idea, if the end users aren't going to use it, no one cares, so shut it down. So we prioritize, first of all, on end users. And second, a lot of technologies are fantastic, right? We drove down the 101 and you saw probably 100 technologies that are fantastic on the way here tonight. And that in itself isn't good enough. So we take the end user validation, it has to have the end user validation, and then it has to have the executive sponsorship. So that's the next level of prioritization. So even if it's a fantastic idea and the end users love it, if the BUs don't love it, if our partners don't love it, doesn't matter. And what we found is by the time you get through all those things, that funnel is pretty narrow. It's usually 3 to 5 ideas over the course of a year or two that we narrow down, and then that's good enough. We can run with those.
Great.
Yeah, adding on, we focus on projects where there's a combination of sponsoring group, which is sometimes a business, sometimes a core technology group, and unique value we can add being here locally in the Bay Area. And so that's been enough to filter down to the things that we can actually handle. Some of the other ones, if they're really great ideas and there's really enough pull, we'll make introductions and leave it to those other groups to drive the work on their own, and that's happened as well.
So for us, I think our strategic advantage is analog engineering. We think we got the best analog engineers on the planet, and we'll rely on them about their opinion about which technology looks the most promising and could lead to a breakthrough.
And I think for IBM, it's about the uniqueness of the use case, and whether it's a problem that we've solved before, whether it's a problem that applies for machine learning or AI techniques in this particular space. Those are the things that help distill it. But overall, we're happy to have that initial dialogue with anybody free of charge and talk through the challenge that is facing and different approaches to solving it. And sometimes that filters it out that this is just a traditional programming model that we really don't need to bring in the data science team for.
Great. Well, we're going to be have some more networking time in a little bit, and I hope our panel will stick around. And I know there were a few more questions that didn't get asked. So I would like to thank Natalie Cummings with IBM, Justin Muller with CISCO Chill, with Mike Magyar with Gore Innovation Center, and Nimrode Moreshet with Analog Devices. So thank you all for a very good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do also want to introduce you to two people who didn't get mentioned before, and to Jeff Shaw, who is the CEO of American Inno, who's responsible for all of these sites. So Jeff, welcome to Silicon Valley. It's great to have you here. And to Mary Huss, the publisher of the Silicon Valley Business Journal and the San Francisco Business Times. So Mary, thank you also for being here. And I know I've got a couple of things I have to say before I'm able to let you all go, because we will have networking, drinks, and some light bites out as well. By the way, very nice spread on that. If you want to stay plugged into the ecosystem, you can sign up for The Beat and check out AmericanInno.com. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Inno, what they have coming up throughout their network of sites and markets, and for partnership opportunities, please talk to Jeff or to Will, and they can lead you down the right path. And their events are at AmericanInno.com. Of course, we hope that you're all subscribers to the Silicon Valley Business Journal and the San Francisco Business Times. Go to our sites, and we produce content every day that's focused in on Silicon Valley and San Francisco Bay Area, both together and separately. And lastly, a big thank you to our amazing sponsor. Thank you to Analog Devices for bringing us, for setting us up here in the garage. I think this is the nicest garage I've ever been in. So, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.